he was the first person after we had worked together for just like 2 or 3 sessions, and he said, you were born to be a coach." And I looked at him and I said, "What? What do you mean? Like basketball coach?" He's like, "No, a leadership coach, a professional coach." He said, it's one of your superpowers. Like, this is in your DNA."
Welcome back to episode 2 of the Leadership Laboratory. My name is Lane, but I'm not your host. Jamie is going to be your host. And if you listened to the first episode, welcome to episode 2. I laid the groundwork for episode 2 and episode 1. So make sure to go and listen to that and get those really 5 nuggets of why the Leadership Laboratory is here. We said in the last episode that this is going to be a little bit about Jamie, who she is, why she does what she does. And I'll be the first one to tell you, when I get to onboard new clients, I can really get a sense of why someone wants to put this out into the world. And I will share with you, Jamie is one of the most genuine leaders that I have been around. And she cares with her community. She cares what she's doing. She's an author. She speaks to women's groups. She has the credentials. But we want to know who Jamie is, why Jamie does what she does, what is her story. And so that is what this episode is going to be about. It's going to be a brief introduction of who she is. And so, Jamie, with this, I'm excited to hear a little bit about your story. I know a little bit about it, but I want the whole piece of it. So I'm going to give you the microphone, and let's hear the whole journey for Jamie.
Thank you, Lana. It's such a nice introduction. I appreciate that. Well, I'm gonna give you the spoiler alert here that what I do today was not my own idea. And let me rewind. So out of college, I joined a company that was in the automotive refinish industry, and I knew nothing about cars and paint. I was the third female to join a team of 400. I was the youngest on average by about 20 years. Hadn't grown up in the industry, so I didn't have stories to regale about, when I was in pigtails running around grandpa's shop. And the one thing that I did have was a college degree, and much of their aging workforce did not. So if we were playing the game, which one of these things is not like the others, I was raising my hand in each of those categories. And I got there and I was new and shiny and I was so excited to learn and grow. But what I realized is that once the men that I was working with started to do the math that this young girl was being groomed to be their boss, potentially, I'm sure you can imagine, I'm going to air quote the shenanigans that came my way. And it was interesting because my mom was a teacher, my dad was a firefighter. I didn't really have any basis of comparison for what the business world was like. And so I just assumed it was like this everywhere. So I went about being me and came across all kinds of interesting situations. I mean, I remember getting completely lit up when I walked into one of my customer locations by a gentleman who just looked at me and he said, "Are you the new paint rep?" And I said, "Yes." And he just started yelling of what I later realized was something that my predecessor was a part of. I had nothing to do with it, but there was a lesson right there in how to stay calm under pressure and how to command respect from somebody who's not delivering it to you. On another occasion, I had, who I later found out, a woman who called my boss and told him that when I came to town to visit customers, I covered a territory in Northwest Colorado and up into Wyoming and Nebraska. And she shared a story that while I was there, I went out with the guys, got drunk, and I was dancing on the bar, which was completely untrue. I went to a movie by myself that night. And when my boss called to ask me this question, I remember he was hemming and hawing like, "Tammy, I have to ask you something. I'm sorry." And I remember saying to him, like, "Tim, spit it out." And he said, "Were you doing this?" And I said, "What do you think the answer to that question is?" And he said, "I don't think so, but I have to ask you." And I said, "No, I absolutely was not doing that." And, that was a lesson in, wow, like, as women, we're so much stronger when we're united, right? Than we're trying to be catty. And, I'll never forget that, but it helped shape and form, who I am and what I represent. And then I don't play those games whatsoever. Well, fast forward and 10 years into my career in automotive refinish, where I've figured out a few things. I initially learned a lot of lessons the hard way, but then I really started stepping into my confidence and learning that I could flex it like a muscle, like just like you can a bicep. Somebody gave me a book. It was about 6 years into my career, and it's called something to the effect of Why Men Don't Ask for Directions and Women Can't Read Maps. And that book was so eye-opening because it started talking about the science about how our brains work differently. And that was a huge aha for me because it occurred to me that I'm like, wow, if I can recognize and work with our differences rather than against them, it was like I cracked this code open. It was so exciting and my meetings were so much more effective and I communicated better and I received promotions and commensurate increases in compensation. Well, 10 years later, I had gotten my MBA and I realized that while I loved what I did, I always worked in some aspect of sales, business development, marketing. I couldn't care less about cars and paint. I did not have the passion that some of these guys had. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat if I could be in an industry where I had the passion, as well as bringing some of the polish and executive presence that I had learned over time to develop. And so that's when I pivoted over to the energy industry and worked in renewables for a little bit. And when I got to oil and gas in particular, another male dominated industry, and it felt like Groundhog Day all over again. Like just some of the same shenanigans, going out to a rig site. I was told, this is a direct quote, don't be wearing them stilettos out here. And I responded to that and I said, well, my soles are steel toed. So is that okay? Because, steel toed boots are the proper PPE on site. But what was interesting when I got to oil and gas is that, like I said, some of the same challenges, but I knew what I was doing this time and I didn't the first time. And as I followed the formula that I had developed in automotive refinish, again, I got promotions, increases in compensation, and other things that without a technical degree is somewhat unheard of in the oil and gas industry. And other women started to take note and asked me, "How are you doing this?" And I said, "Well, here, let me tell you, because I this is not a secret. There's enough room for all of us, and the women in that industry are so smart. I mean, some of these women can do algorithms in their heads, and they're part of like really complex calculations. And it broke my heart because I would sit in meetings sometimes, representing the sales or the business development side, and a question would be asked. And I would know that Molly had the answer, for example, but Molly wouldn't speak up in the meeting. And then the meeting would end, and I would go to her afterwards and say, "Hey, you knew that answer. You're the smartest person in there. You knew that answer, didn't you?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Why didn't you say it?" And she said, "Well, Jim always talks over to me, or I'm intimidated in that environment." And like I feel this in my chest right now talking about this. And this was years ago. And then there was one day I was at a luncheon with a group of women, and afterwards I was getting on the elevator with another woman, and she just said to me, she goes, "I really appreciated how you introduced yourself in the meeting today," because we all went around the room and introduced ourselves. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, it was just very clear and it was very confident." And I thought, Is there an opportunity for me to teach this to people, to share? Because that's how you establish your turf, right? And that's how you make a first impression when you introduce yourself." And it was exciting to me. And that's when I started getting requests to come speak to women's groups like, "Hey, Jamie, tell us your secrets." And I'm like, I would love to. I would love to share this with you. And then every time I spoke, and this is no exaggeration, every time I spoke, a handful of women came up to me afterwards and said, "This was great. I want to learn more. How do I buy your book?" And at the time, the book was not a bucket list item for me. I was not the person who thought, "Oh, I should write a book someday." But when people start asking you the same question, when you start hearing the same question, I consider that a universe nudge or a God whisper. So I thought, well, maybe I should give some thought to this. And so I shared the idea of the book and what I would put into, the concept of it with a friend of mine over lunch one day. He's an entrepreneur. And then unbeknownst to me, after that lunch, he shared it with a friend of his who owns a publishing company. Now, I didn't know that. Fast forward another month or two, and I was out on a rig site. I was in middle of nowhere, Texas, and I get a phone call. I'm kind of surprised I even had service. And I answer the call, and it's from a woman who introduces herself as my friend's friend. It says, "I own a publishing company. I'd love to talk to you about the concept for your book." And I remember kind of like looking at my phone and looking at the number, like, is somebody, like, who is this? Right? Are you playing a trick on me? She was serious. And so I said, well, this isn't top priority right now. And I was, comfortable in my corporate job and paycheck every 2 weeks and benefits and things like this. I said, but may I hang on to your number and call you should priorities shift, should life change, right? And she said, sure. So There's another couple months after that, and this is the part of the story where I share very honestly that this year in particular was it was a very difficult year for me, for my husband. We'd been tragically lost 2 friends of ours. I'd never been through anything like that. Struggles with infertility, which were particularly challenging when I worked in fully male team, and I had to silently suffer through that. Nobody knew what I was going through, and yet and I would show up and perform. And I also started to realize that my company, I'll just say it this way, that our moral compasses pointed in different directions. Or maybe I would say one of us had one and one of us did not. And I was realizing that this wasn't going to be my long-term home that I had hoped for. And there was a day that I got called into my boss's office. It was a Tuesday. I remember this day very well. 2 weeks after a particularly heartbreaking infertility event, I will say. And he handed me a paper and he said, "You're being terminated." And there were 3 bullet points on that letter of why I was being fired, not laid off, not let go, but fired, which I'd never been fired in my life. And I looked at the bullet points and I looked at him and I called him out on it. And I said, "You know, these are total BS." And he basically just nodded his head. I later figured out, was a narcissist and he was lying about my performance to protect his. And the company went out of business about 6 months later. So as I drove home, though, on that Tuesday, and at 11:30 a.m., I was like, I don't even know what to do with myself right now. I've never not worked on a Tuesday at 11:30 a.m., right? Except for maybe random vacation days here or there. But I had that publisher's phone number. And so I sent her a text message and I said, "Hi, remember me? So my schedule's freed up a little. Are you are you free for coffee? You're free for coffee tomorrow." And she said yes. And so I met her at a coffee shop and talked about, all right, what does it actually look like to write a book? And I wanted a true book, not something that's the facade of a book or, basically a large brochure. And speaks to Jamie. I had a spreadsheet already put together with, estimated page count, word count, things like that. And she said, "Yeah, that's it." And I drove home from that meeting and I talked to my husband and, we were both, it was very obvious that I was overdue for self-care and a little breathing room. And I said to him, I said, "I want to make the rest of this year." There were 3 months left in the year. I said, "I want to make it my full-time job to write this book. I don't want to go searching for another job right now." And he said, "Go, babe, go. I've got your back. Do it." And so I spent those next 3 months doing that. And it was such a wonderful experience and therapeutic in a variety of ways. And it's all about confidence and leadership. And the book that, if you, I don't know if you can see it in the camera shot here, but the book is called "Speak Up, Sister: The Professional Woman's Guide to Confidence and Success." And when I finished the initial manuscript of that book, and there's still a lot that happens with the editing and the publishing, but I finished it and I looked at all of those pages and I thought, wow, like there's some there's some pretty good information in here. And how do I really get this out? How do I get this in the hands of women so that they can capitalize on these things that I learned? And so I hired a business coach, and God bless Travis. He was the first person after we had worked together for just like 2 or 3 sessions, and he said, "You were born to be a coach." And I looked at him and I said, "What? What do you mean? Like basketball coach?" He's like, "No, a leadership coach, a professional coach." He said, "It's one of your superpowers. Like, this is in your DNA." He said, "Jamie, this is how you take this to the next level." And from that moment, I said, "Tell me more," because curiosity has always been one of my superpowers as well. And he helped me build everything that has now evolved into where we are today. And I'm so proud to share that year to date, the ladies who have graduated from my programs have collectively increased their compensation by $531,500. And these are opportunities. This was a budget that was already out there. They just learned how to go for it, how to ask for it properly, and how to earn it. I was recently named the top empowerment coach of the year, which is such a humble honor. And what's most exciting to me about that, and I get goosebumps just saying it, is that it 100% is a reflection of the results that women have achieved going through my programs. People who came in, maybe skeptical or thinking like, I don't know if I deserve this or we can do this or like, how does this even work? And coming out saying, wow, like this was about so much more than professional development. This was about personal growth. I can't imagine life having not done this.
I love hearing that story, the full story, and that was the goal of this show. Not much for me to add in here. And this was a purely get to know Jamie, get to know who you are about to listen to and why she is doing what she's doing. So, Jamie, thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for letting the audience in on a little bit about you and the backstory. So, before they go to episode 3, before they hit the ground running with this, I may not be on another episode. So, the honor has been mine with these first 2 episodes. So, thank you for letting me sit in here. Any parting words for the people that are listening to this before they go to episode 3?
I am so honored and excited to share this empowerment journey, to share these tools. And I already look forward to receiving the messages that say, Jamie, get this, or Jamie, guess what? It's my favorite part of my day when I get those messages. So I hope you're listening, and I hope that you are setting a goal right now to be one of those people to send that message, because it speaks to your success behind it.
Incredible. Guys, before you head out of here, do me a favor, go to Apple, go to Spotify, and subscribe, like the show. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast and make sure you do not miss when a next episode comes out there. Jamie, thank you again for letting me be here for these first couple episodes. I'm excited for what is to come on the Leadership Laboratory, and we'll see you next time.
You're a great ally, Lane. Thank you so much.